Okay, now we're recording for real. So we know that we all have two souls, right? We covered that. We know that each of the two souls is made up of 10 soul attributes or soul functions, 3 elements of intellect, and 7 what are called midot or emotional attributes. Then we also have the 3 garments of the soul, which are not essential to the soul, like the intellect and the emotions, or in simple terms, like your ideas and your feelings. Your opinions and your feelings are really who you are, right? That's more essential to you. The garments of the soul are your expressions, your modes of expression, which are your thoughts, your thought, the function of thought, your speech, and your action. Those are much more external to the soul. They're not essential because you can think something you don't believe. You can't believe something you don't believe. I can tell you to say 2 + 2 = 12, but I can't tell you to believe that 2 + 2 = 12, right? So you can think it, you can say it, you can write it down on a piece of paper, but you can't believe it. So in that sense, the garments of the soul are external to the soul, whereas the opinions, the thought, the ideas and the feelings, the intellect and the emotions of the soul are essential to the soul. Then he took a little detour to explain that although it would seem that the garments of the soul are a lower level of soul function because they're not actually the soul, nevertheless, the fact is that that's where you have a much deeper connection with the divine, with God. Why? Because as long as you're connecting to God through your intellect or through your feelings, all you can connect to is the extent to which you can grasp, the extent to which you can understand God, or you can feel the presence of God. But God himself, the essence of God, human mind doesn't have that capacity, and the human heart doesn't have that capacity. Only through mitzvahs can you actually embrace or grasp God himself. Why? Because we explained that the Kabbalah tells us that God and his intellect, God and his desire is one thing. God is indivisible. Not like a human being who there's the human and then there's the opinions and there's me and there's my desires, but I wouldn't really say that they're absolutely identical. It's not one and the same. My desires can change because I can change. God doesn't change, which means his God and his will are one. God and his intellect are one. So if I can somehow manage to wrap myself around his intellect, if I can have my mind engage in his thoughts, then I am embracing the divine. With the garment of my soul, not with the essence of my soul. So there's that advantage to having the garment of the soul that can reach an intimacy with God that my essential soul can't. It just can't reach that. That's where we got to until chapter 6. Now, chapter 6 started with how all of this reality is reflected in the animal soul. So we have 2 souls. Till now, we've been talking primarily about the godly soul. The godly soul is that piece of the divine that God breathes into us, not like the rest of creation that is created through speech. The animal soul, on the other hand, is also made up of the 10 faculties or the 10 attributes, 3 intellect and 7 emotion. And as we said, the emotion is born from the intellect. For example, a small mind will get excited, is excited by small things. We discussed that last week, because the emotions come from the intellect. But those 10 attributes in the animal soul are basically a reflection of the 10 attributes in the godly soul, only in unholiness. Then it got into a discussion about what exactly is unholiness. When we say that that there is the unholiness in the world or the evil in the world, what are we talking about? That's the conversation we had last week. We started last week, we'll continue now. And the description he gives is, holiness is that which is transparent and subservient to its creator, to God, to the purpose for which it was created. Anything that is not transparent to God is in the category of unholiness, of klipa. Klipa meaning the shell, the husk, with the external, not holy. So that is basically the sum total of everything in creation, except that which is decidedly holy. Everything else is not holy, which sounds like an obvious statement, but it's not, because normally when we think about just regular everyday human activity, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing unholy about human activity, except that with this definition, you don't have to have something unholy about it for it to be unholy. You have to have something holy about it for it to be holy. So you don't ask what's unholy about it, you ask what's holy about it. So like we talked about eating, is there anything holy about eating? Not necessarily. Is there anything unholy about eating? Not necessarily. So what category is eating in? Food. The answer is, assuming it's kosher food, and assuming you recite the bracha on the food, it's not exactly holy, but that's why he started to explain in chapter 6 that there are two levels of unholiness. There is what's called the irredeemable unholiness, and then there is the holiness klipat noga. Noga means a shine, which means it has a little shine of holiness in it. So there's unholiness, there's klipa that is kind of a mix of holiness and unholiness, and then there's the unholiness that's just plain unholy, has no good in it at all. Not that it literally has no good in it, because if it has no good in it, it can't exist. If it has no godliness in it, if it has no godly spark, then it doesn't exist. What it means is that it has no available godliness in it. Whatever godliness there is present in that thing is so minute and so buried that it's practically not present. Hey, we were just talking about you. Although I can't say what we said.
Hello.
We have a seat for you up in front.
Okay.
Okay, so where are we up to in chapter 6? We're up to, you want a Tanya?
Yes.
Somebody's throwing a book at you.
No.
Where should we start? You see on the side of the page, somewhere in the middle of chapter 6, there's a little note that shows you where the new day starts. V'chein kol hadiburim, also all of speech. V'chein kol hadiburim on the page this way. Only one. So too are all of the utterances.
Okay.
In here it's v'chein.
What page?
וכן כל הדיבורים.
Okay. It's
24.
24. So we're going back a couple of lines, but it'll be good for context. So v'chein kol hadiburim v'chol hamachshavos asher lo laHashem hema v'ritzoni la'avodasai. Remember, I will reiterate what I said in the last few classes, but it's very important. try to say some of the words. I'm going to recite all the words as I go through it, but try to say some of the words, because saying the words of Torah is also, in addition to the understanding and the comprehending the Torah, saying the words of Torah is holy also. So okay, kol hadiburim, all of the speech, kol hamachshavos, and all thoughts, asher lo LaHashem hey mavli l'retzon l'avodah, that are not explicitly for God and for His will and to serve Him. Shazeu pirush lashon sitra achara. This is the meaning of the term sitra achara. In Kabbalah, the unholiness is referred to as sitra achara, which means the other side. Pirush tzad acher. She'ein tzad kedusha. It's not the side of holiness. The tzad hakadusha ene elo hashra v'hamshacha mikdushas shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. The holy side is where God rests, where God dwells, where God is present. Ve'ein hakadosh Baruch Hu shayra elo al davar shebatel eslo yisbarach, and godliness only dwells on that which is transparent to godliness. So, in order for something to be quote unquote unholy, it doesn't mean sinful. It doesn't mean anything wrong. It just means it is not expressly devoted to God. That's what in Hasidic terms, in Tanya language, when we talk about ra, which is bad, or you talk about unholiness, or you talk about klipa, you're talking about anything that, even if it's not sinful, even if it's not terrible, it's not egregious, it's just not God focused. That's the other side. That's sitra achar. Whether something is batel means transparent or subservient, or is nullified before God, is like doesn't sense itself at all in the presence of God. Bein bepoel mamish, whether literally completely transparent to God like angels, kamalachim al yonim, bein bekoyach kechol ish Yisrael lamata, or whether in potential like any one of us, shebekoyach li is batel mamish l'gabei Kadosh Baruch Hu, who we all have in our capacity, it's within our reach to be transparent to God, b'mesiras nafshei al kedushas Hashem, as we've seen many times in history, unfortunately, that Jews have laid down their lives to sanctify God's name. So we do have the ability to completely be devoted to God without any sense of self interfering with that devotion. So whether we're actively transparent to God like angels, or whether we simply have it in potential, the fact is that if you have that potential, then there is godliness there. But what if you don't have that potential? What if you're just waiting for, like, you're a kosher sandwich waiting for somebody to do a mitzvah with it? Then it's that's why the sages say that's why the sages say that somebody who's sitting and studying Torah all by himself, just one person studying Torah, the presence of Hashem dwells there. And then 10 Jews sitting together, a minyan, even if they're not studying Torah, there's already holiness there. Why? Because there's the potential for subservience to God or transparency to God. So when you have that potential and you have a critical mass, a collection of people that have that potential, God is present there. The point is that if you're talking about something that is not transparent to God, but something that is not transparent to Him, but it's something that is separate and considers itself autonomous, does not receive vitality from the holiness of God. How then does it exist? If it doesn't receive vitality from God, then how is it here? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Doesn't receive vitality from the innermost, from the inner aspect of godliness or holiness. Rather, it receives vitality from God in what is referred to as from behind. What does that mean? Very simply, it means later in Tanya, he gets into this, he clarifies this expression a lot more. In a nutshell, what he says is, if I want to give you a gift, If I, if I want to give you a gift, I look you in the eye and I hand you the gift. What if I have to give you something, but I really don't like you? Then I turn away and I give you what I need to give you, but I don't look at you. In other words, I turn the back of my head to you. That's called bechinas achorayim. When I'm giving something to you, but I really don't want to. So then why am I giving it to you?
Because you have to.
Why? I have some other need. There's something that I need to get done, so I have to give you this, but not because I like you. So we talked about this last week at length, where I do I want the job? Remember we talked, do I want a job? No, I don't want a job. I want the money. Do I really want the money? No, I don't want the money. I want the stuff I get for the money. Do I really want the stuff I get for the money? No, I don't want, I want the pleasure. So do I really want the job or do I really want the pleasure? So God creates kosher and non-kosher. Well, if you only like the kosher, why'd you create the non-kosher? Why do you make it so complicated? The answer is the kosher God gives vitality to face to face. He wants kosher. Well, then why did he create the non-kosher? Because he wants us to have a choice so that when we eat the kosher, it's meaningful. So he doesn't want the non-kosher, but he wants what the non-kosher brings, which is free choice. So he creates the non-kosher also, but mibechinas achorayim, in this aspect of turning the head away. So why is it that when you want to express your displeasure with somebody, you turn your face away from them? Because we're created in God's image, and that's what God does. When God creates something that he doesn't really want, but he needs it for the result he's looking for, he gives the vitality that everything needs in order to exist to that thing also, but he gives it without the face participating.
Can I get power from the Sitra Achra? Is that
The Sitra Achra also gets vitality from God. So yes, it can go through.
Can that impact?
Yeah.
Okay, so Sitra Achra has the power and
Nothing has power. God can use the Sitra Achra to do that also.
so it always comes from God.
Yeah.
Like Bilam.
Yeah. So, mebechinas acharayim means that the divine energy, sheyordim mimadrega lamadrega, goes down from level to level. Revavis madrega is many thousands, myriads of levels. Beishtalshus ha'olam to this chain effect of worlds. Derech ila v'olol, through cause and effect. What does that mean through cause and effect? It means that one diminution, one reduction in God's energy that creates a level of creation. That is the effect of the tzimtzum, of the reduction, right? So the reduction is the cause. The effect is what you're left with. But then what you're left with then influences what comes after it. So what if it goes under the ladder, it's the effect now becomes a cause to the next effect, right? So that's how all of these reductions and downgrades in divine revelation, all the way to the point where you can have tzimtzumim rabim, many contractions of God's influence, ad shenismayit kol kacha or v'achayas, until the light of God has been reduced so much, the light and the vitality of God, miut achar miut, one reduction after another, ad sheyuchol listamtzeim lislabish bebechinas golus, to the point where it can then be contracted so much that it then is enclosed, so to speak, in a kind of exile. In that thing that is separate from God. That make any sense, or is that too esoteric? What does it mean to be in exile? Practically speaking, we're all in exile. What does that mean?
What is it?
What is exile? Galut. That's just on vacation. What's exile? So you're trapped on vacation. Now, exile has a specific meaning. Exile means
Out of my comfort zone, out of where I belong.
out of where you belong and not and you're not in control of that.
So all
Not-
the
not just that
answers
you-
are right. You're
Yeah.
from home, it's
So-
out of your control.
And you're trapped, but it's because something else is controlling you that's not really your true authority.
What if you caused it though, and we caused our?
It doesn't matter. The result is that you're now in galut. You're in exile. Exile means I am no longer free to do and be who I really am. I'm subservient to something other than myself.
But then if we caused if we got ourselves out of or into the galut,
Right?
and they say "Dor shebet hamikdash lo nivna ki'ilu charab," because we didn't do enough to bring it in, so
Right.
it's like we destroyed it.
Yeah.
So then it's on us.
Yeah. So we're not talking about whose fault it is. We're talking about the fact. What is galut? Galut means that you're not autonomous. You're under the control of something foreign. You're under a foreign ruler. That's what exile means.
There is no like Jewish law here. There is, U.S. justice.
That's one way of looking at it. What about in Israel? You're still in galut because God is not 100% in control. So galut means when you're not free to serve that which you're supposed to be serving. You're being controlled or you're being governed by something other than that which is true to you. That's called galut. What happens when the divine energy is made to come down level after level all the way till it is reduced so much that it ends up in galut? Right? That's what he just said, that the divine energy, the divine creative energy ends up in a kind of exile state. What does that mean? That means that it is now actively giving vitality to something which denies its own creator. That's a serious exile. You have something created by God, and the energy with which God creates it is now invested in that thing, enclosed in that thing, and that thing thinks that it's separate from God.
How rude.
How rude. This was a perfect occasion for that.
I was waiting.
So that's called the galut. That's the galut that we're talking about. To give it life and to maintain it, to bring it into existence from absolute nothingness. That it won't go back to being nothing like before it was created. That's the state of divine energy in that which is not subservient and transparent to God. God's energy is there, obviously, because this thing exists, and the only thing that can make something exist out of nothing is divine energy. But that divine energy is so diminished and so far from home, so to speak. It's in exile in that it's now present, giving strength and vitality to that which denies the truth of God's oneness. That's why this world, the physical world in which we live, is called the world of klipa and sitra achra, the world of unholiness and the other side. And that's why all of the deeds, activities of this world are harsh and wicked. And wicked people prosper in this world, as it says in Kabbalah. So if you ever wonder why the wicked prosper, ostensibly you just got the answer.
So for clarification, the world was created that way, or
Yes.
for that? Why?
Actually, it wasn't created that way. That it became that way when Adam and Eve ate from that tree. It all started with that tree.
What do you mean wicked?
I'm sorry, you'll have to listen to the recording. Wicked means anything that's not devoted to God. So wicked is not what we mean when we say wicked in common language. It means anything that's not completely devoted to God. Now, in the parentheses, in the footnote, he says, Im hayois besoichoi spheres eser spheres da asiya de kedusha. Although in this state of exile, there's also the 10 attributes of how many? Are you familiar with the 4 worlds? Anybody ever hear of the 4 worlds? Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, which basically means 4 general categories of levels of divine revelation versus concealment. In Atzilut, it's pure godliness. In Bria, there's a little bit of God is now allowing for the possibility of something other than himself, something created by him. Yetzira is that other thing has a form and a shape and an identity, but no physical matter. And Asiya is where things start to exist on their own. And Asiya is the 4th world. Asiya is split in 2. There's Asiya, the spiritual Asiya, and then there's Asiya Gashmi, which is the physical world in which we live. So what he's saying is here is although in this world you have the 10 holy attributes of Asiya, ubetoch esespheres da Asiya elu hein esespheres di Yetzira, ubesoichon esespheres di Bria, ubesoichon esespheres da Atzilus, shebesoichon orin seif baruch hu. In the 10 attributes of Asiya, you have hidden in there somewhere, giving them their vitality, the 10 attributes of the world before it. And in the 10 attributes of the world before it, you have the 10 attributes of the world before it, giving it vitality. In other words, buried deep in there somewhere, you have God himself, right? So God himself invests himself in the 10 attributes of the world of Atzilus. And then from that, the world of Atzilus emanates down into the world of Bria. So you have the 10 attributes of Atzilus manifesting the 10 attributes of Bria. And then the 10 attributes of Bria descend and manifest the 10 attributes of Yetzira. And the 10 attributes of Yetzira descend and manifest the 10 attributes of Asiya. So we're saying that the 10 attributes here in this world that are all, in this unholy state of separation and distance from God is not really geographically distant from God because God is right there in them. That's what's inside the 10 attributes of this world, which come from the 10 attributes of the world before, which come from the 10 attributes of the world. So there is godliness present, only it's completely concealed in these many levels of concealment. As you will see if you study Kabbalah, Eitz Chaim, the 47th gate, chapter 2, and the book of Gilgulim, check it. Back into the text, the main text of it. Ella, as I mentioned earlier, Klipa is divided up into 2 categories, into 2 levels, one lower than the other. What are they? Hamadrega hatachtoina, the lower level. He sholosh klipes hatmeos verois lagamri ve'ein bahem tov kalal. They are the 3 unholy klipas that have no good in them at all. I mentioned before, what does it mean they have no good in them at all?
The pure evil.
But if it's pure evil, how does it exist?
That's from the
No, that godliness, there is goodness in it, but it's buried so deep that it's like almost irrelevant. It's just, yeah, that kind of idea. In Tanya, later we'll get into in more detail, what does it mean when something is forbidden? Without getting into the details, the point is that there are things that are, you have 2 different kinds of food. One kind of food is from klipa and is kosher, and another kind of food is from klipa and is not kosher. Why? One kind of food is from klipa of klipat noga, which means it has some available good in it. So when you eat it, you're accomplishing something spiritually. You're elevating the physical thing into a state of spiritual relevance. But then there is the kind of food that is not kosher, which means the definition of not kosher is by eating it, you're not going to help it. You're not going to elevate it because it's not available to being elevated. That is the 3 klipat atmeot, the 3 unholy klipas that have no good in them at all, meaning there's no good that's relevant to you. as far as you're concerned, there's no goodness in this at all. Because whatever goodness is there is so concealed and so buried that it's not available to you. So when we say something is forbidden, it's because the only reason you're allowed to eat anything to begin with, the only reason you're ever allowed to eat anything in God's world is because that's part of his plan, because you can elevate what you're eating into a state of holiness. This is not available for your elevation and bringing it into holiness, so why are you eating it? That's the definition of kosher and non-kosher on a spiritual level. So when we say that a certain kalipa has no good in it at all, it means it has enough good in it to make it exist, but that's not enough to be relevant to you as far as you're concerned in your life in this world. That's the three unholy klipas. V'nikru b'merkavas Yecheskel, and they are mentioned in the prophecy of Yecheskel's vision of the chariot. They're referred to as Ruach Se'ora, V'anan Godol, etc. There are three descriptions that Yecheskel uses, Ezekiel uses in his vision of the chariot. He says that there was a strong wind and a thick cloud and a flickering flame. Those three descriptions are the descriptions of the three unholy klipas. Why does he mention this here? We're not Kabbalists. He's mentioning it just to tell you that it's not like the world went rogue and there's this unholiness that's completely devoid of godliness. It's part of the plan. Ezekiel saw it in his vision. It's the way it's supposed to be. So don't get too worked up over the fact that it sounds like there's this unholiness that's gone rogue. There's no such thing. And as we said in the first chapter about the difference between the quote unquote Jewish soul versus the non-Jewish soul, the non-Jewish soul, just like the rest of creation, comes from these three klipas. Whereas the Jewish soul, he'll say, V'kiyum v'chayis kol macholes, I'm sorry, he'll get to that in a second. V'kiyum v'chayis kol macholes asuris me'atzumeach k'may orla k'laya kedem, and also foods that come from vegetation. Like, for example, did you know that you're not allowed to eat the first 3 years of a fruit tree? Those first 3 years, Arla. That kind of food also gets its vitality, its existence from these three klippas, a klaya kerem, and also when you mix the wrong kinds of species together, it makes them forbidden, etc. As it says again in Kabbalah. V'chein, and also kiyum v'chayis kol ha'maisa dibur machshava shall kol shasa loisasa, also all the thoughts and all the speech and all the action of any kind of sinful behavior, vanafeim, and anything that comes from it, soif perek, as it says there, etc.
You can't plant kilayim, but you can eat a result of kilayim.
Right.
So I would say.
Except kilaya kerem. Specifically, kerem, kilayim in a vineyard, then you're not allowed to eat it. So what he's saying is that mixed seeds, other than grapes, you're not allowed to do it, but you're allowed to eat it if it's done. I mean, look at all the things that we eat. You ever eat a tangerine? There's so many things.
I don't.
I think it's probably worth mentioning that when he says here that the souls of non-Jews come from these three klippas atmeus that have absolutely no good in them whatsoever, it sounds a little offensive. What that means is two things. First of all, there are two categories. There's the in fact, there are some versions of the Tanya where it says idolaters, not non-Jews. Although chances are it was changed. It was originally non-Jews. It was changed to idolaters because of the Christian censors and whoever, But it means that those who have not devoted themselves to Hashem. Jewish people, because we're the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, as he'll get into in chapter 7, because we're the descendants of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and because we stood at Mount Sinai, so we have already in our DNA, like by inheritance, as he said at the beginning of Tanya, we inherit that little bit of instinct to a devotion to godliness that others don't have. They weren't at Mount Sinai. The natural human condition is, just like everything else in creation, is self-preservation, and give me a good reason, I'll do it. So what the reason when he mentions, you know, the souls of the nations of the world and unkosher foods and animals that aren't kosher, he's not being offensive to the animals that aren't kosher. He's not dissing fruits that grow in the first 3 years. If God didn't want the fruits in the first 3 years, why did he make fruit grow in the first 3 years of a tree? Just let the fruit start growing after 3 years. Could have avoided this whole problem altogether. Everything has its reason. Everything has its purpose in God's plan. It's not. He's not discounting the importance of it. He's showing you how in God's creation there is this plethora of levels of divine revelation or concealment that are so varied. You have to look into Torah to find out what God actually wants, and what God wants only because of what he really wants, and this is necessary to get there. In other words, a primary desire versus a secondary desire. So, for example, if you're going to throw a wedding party, so you invite all your best friends. If your best friend doesn't show up, can you still get married? Well, it depends. If when you say best friend, you mean spouse, then no, right? So you have a big party because you're getting married. Most people, if they don't show up, you'll be disappointed, but you still have the wedding. But if your spouse doesn't show up, you have no wedding, right? So there's the primary desire, there's the secondary desire, there's what you're really here for, then there's everything else, the periphery. But the definition of everything else is, if it's not absolutely devoted to God, it's in the it's like the expression, there is the right way and then there's every other way. There's completely devoted to God, and then there's every other possibility. So does that mean that being a little devoted to God but not completely isn't any better than being not devoted at all, because you have to be completely devoted? The answer, of course, is no. The different levels, the different degrees are all important. That's why there are different levels of kalipa. There's kalipat noga, which has some good in it naturally, some residual good that's available to serving God with. And then there's another kind of kalipa that the only way you can serve God with that kind of kalipa is by avoiding it. So somebody asked if you're allowed to play football, because a football is made of a pigskin. So is it kosher to play football?
Yes.
The rabbi says yes. The answer is yes, but why?
Because it's a ball.
Because you don't eat the ball, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to eat the football after you play, then you got a problem. But the same thing is, by the way, is with
If you eat the
If you
ball
lose, you have to eat
before
the
you
ball.
play, that's something else.
then you can't play. Yeah. But what about getting a pig valve in the heart?
What?
A valve in the heart when they do a heart operation.
Oh,
Still not eating.
Even if it's not necessary, because you could use a different valve. You can use an artificial valve. Not absolute. There's nothing wrong with it because you don't ingest it. You don't eat it. The prohibition against pork is eating it. It doesn't say you're not allowed to
but
own
why
pork.
you're not allowed to eat it? Because you don't want it to become part of you.
Right.
Then this valve.
It's part of you.
Or extras or non-food items like.
You don't want
stomach.
something that's gonna make the processing inside your body, because then it's gonna be part of
But
it.
also, if it's your valve, it's a one-time thing. You can do it. But eating, it's like a weekly thing.
Oh.
Or daily,
It's more
hourly.
No, when you eat,
The
it's getting processed in your body, so it's part of your
The idea
blood,
that-
it's part
That's
of
right.
your- everything.
the idea that you don't eat it because it's going to become part of you is one of the benefits or the explanations for the benefits of the mitzvah. But why do we not eat pork?
Because
It's not kosher.
That's awesome.
Exactly,
Because
because
we're
God
told
said don't
not
eat
to.
pork.
If you look at it like biologically, like pig is the closest to human beings' anatomy, which can be maybe one of the reasons why God said, hey, you know what, don't eat that thing.
So God created a whole bunch of things and then looked at what he created and said, "Ooh, that one's a little too close. Don't eat that one." Or God created something that would be forbidden to you. Why would it be forbidden to you? Because he said not to.
Or extras on like non-food items, like some, like.
It depends which ones. I mean, some of them
bleach, I don't know,
bleach.
Bleaching material. something
So
like wood-
if,
yes.
yeah, so the reason they put kosher,
It's nothing.
no, the reason they put the kosher symbols on things that aren't food is because they come in contact with things that you use for food
because it's good for advertisement.
and because it makes money. There was a rabbi,
Come on, bleach, you don't need it to be kosher, it's לא ראוי למאכל כלב,
there's a rabbi in San Jose who says he got a phone call from a water bottling company.
You are cleaning the refrigerator.
Water bottling company. They said, can you put a kosher certification on our product? So he said, what's your product? They said, water. He said, water doesn't need a kosher certification. So they said to him, we didn't ask you if it needs it. We're asking you if you can do it.
So what he said?
He said, oh, sure, for a couple of bucks.
Ham sandwiches.
Of course.
No, because the food companies want it because it helps them sell more products. So they don't care if we need it or don't need it. They get to put another claim on the package. But yeah, but the truth is that even that's not true because you can make bottled water not kosher.
נכון, because if you touch the water and the plastic is melted.
If it's bottled, yeah, on the same lines, or a lot of beverage companies use clarifying agents to make the water more clear, get rid of the impurities. They run things through the water. So what are they running through the water? I went to a bottling company here. They were doing iced tea, bottling iced tea, and I was going to go there to do the kosher inspection. They were using, among other things, iced tea. How could iced tea not be kosher? 2 ingredients: water, tea leaves. Oh, but they also use clam powder as a clarifying agent.
What?
Clarifying agent to get rid of all the little particles in so that when you look through the bottle, it looks crystal clear. It looks like you're looking through glass. You never know what they ran through it to make it that clear. In this case, they were using clam powder.
What is clam?
Clam is shellfish.
Oh.
Anyway,
Clam is
so
kosher.
We don't like it. It's the front.
only as a paint color.
We look on people's faces when they find out that he's this farm.
If it wasn't hard enough already, now we have to watch out for bottled water and tea.
So look, I'll tell you from my experience, I'll tell you very interesting. In the prison work, everybody knows that everybody in prison wants the kosher food, right? It was on some TV show that
Why?
everybody wants. I don't know.
Is it better?
People imagine that it's better. It's not really better. It's just different. It's something that everybody else doesn't get, so they want it. Regardless of
It
why.
just doesn't have poison in it from
Right.
other inmates.
The other inmates don't spit in it in the kitchen. Yeah. Anyway, the point is
I
that
would actually be worried about that specifically.
so they come to me and they say, I need kosher food. And I'm supposed to ask them why. You have to interview them, make sure that it's really a religious obligation. So sometimes they'll say, because I'm obligated by the Bible to eat only clean food. Or I have to follow Leviticus, I have to. So they have all these answers for why they can't eat the non-kosher food, and it's all baloney. None of their answers make any sense. So I was talking about this to the officials at the prison, and they say, so what's the right answer? When you approve somebody for the kosher diet, what's the right? So I said, the right answer is, it has to be certified kosher. That's my only reason. How do I know if it's kosher or not? If it's certified kosher, not if it has fins and scales, and not if it's from a cow, not a pig. None of that matters to me. What matters to me is it has a kosher certification on it. Because there is so much to know about how food is produced that unless you're involved in that industry, you can't possibly know what's kosher and what's not kosher.
The pain makes sense because God says so, you get it? Not the right hand. The pain makes sense
But-
because God says so.
Because God said what?
So-
What is kosher? Nobody in prison serves pork. The
Ask
prison
the
doesn't serve
rabbi.
pork.
And
Exactly.
these aren't Jewish.
That's the right answer.
They are not Jewish incarcerated now. These are.
Most of them are not.
Are they Jewish?
There are some,
Only for tax. Only for tax reasons.
yeah, for jaywalking.
The other question is, when you check the ice tea, you didn't approve it.
No,
Why?
because it had,
Maybe it's a bigger portion, that's why they want it.
no, they really want it because it's produced outside of the prison. That's really why they want it. They want it, it comes in prepackaged, so. Anyway, so what do we get from this chapter before we go off into,
Nobody can poison your food.
I noticed a similarity between the four worlds, the way where humanity lives with that concealment completely within, and then the klipa, the different levels of klipa. That was very intriguing to me. It was how Hashem is concealed. He's like, he is everything and he's at the very top, but then he creates this world, which creates this world, which creates this world. And then he's concealed within all of that. And it seemed to be directly aligned with the fact that most of humanity is living in that disconnect, in that concealment of not knowing or being connected to the creator. He is that deep down in humanity as well. And then there was something that tied it to the klipa as well, just that the way everything is produced, or there's things where there's still good in it, even though it's that deep down. There was just a very similar trend in
Yeah.
that.
yeah. Klipa is called klipa. Klipa, meaning the unholiness, is called klipa, which literally means the shell, because anything that conceals godliness, by definition, is ungodliness, right? Is the opposite. So anything that, when you look at it, it doesn't express godliness, that's klipa. So if you look at a cow, you don't see godliness. If you look at a dead cow, you certainly don't see godliness. If you look at a cow hide hanging on a rack, you don't see godliness. When you look at a Torah scroll, all of a sudden you see godliness. Why? It's just a cowhide. What changed? And it's not that you're looking at the letters written on it. You're looking at a closed, rolled up Torah scroll. You don't see the letters. But you see something that is in the service of God. So it's like the shell was peeled away. You've revealed the purpose of this thing. So that's why I mentioned a few weeks ago, when you're eating food, which is always a great example for this whole concept of revealing godliness and everything, food is always a very good example because we do it so often. And how often do we stop to think about what we're doing? When you eat food, and he gets into this more in chapter 7 also, when you eat food and you're just eating because of the pleasure of the food, there's nothing holy happening here. God is completely sidelined. What if you're not eating just for the pleasure? You're eating because you have to sustain yourself. You're hungry. If you don't eat, you'll get weak, you'll get sick. You have to eat. So what's that? It's not holy, but you can't call it unholy. You're not offending God, but is it godly? No. So is it klipa or is it kedusha?
I think it's kind of mitzvah.
Huh?
שמרתם מאוד לנפשותיכם, עם עשוי.
Yeah, I mean,
Kind of mitzvah if you're just eating to stay alive.
Kind
What's
of a
wrong
mitzvah.
about eating?
Nothing. That's my point. Klipa doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's not yet right. If you're eating because it's Shabbos, you're supposed to have delicious food on Shabbos. So we'll talk about that in chapter 6 and chapter 7. But even without that, talked about this last week, even without getting into the mitzvah of the eating, if when you eat food, you're aware of the fact that the only reason you're eating it is because this is the design that God placed on this is how God created the world. God wants his world to work in a way with this system of levels of creation existing, subsisting on the other levels of creation. That the mineral has to feed the vegetable, and the vegetable feeds the animal, and the animal feeds the human. Why is it like that? In fact, you know the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God came to them and said, of all the trees in the field you may eat, but of this one particular tree, don't eat. What was the big surprise in that statement from God? What do you think was the big surprise? You can't eat from this tree? I think that the biggest surprise in that statement from God was that from all the trees in the field you can eat. Remember, they hadn't ever heard of eating before. They were just created a couple of minutes ago. So I can rip a limb off of another living being and eat it? Ingest? Why would I do that? What kind of crazy design is that? God said, this is how I planned the world, that you're going to eat in order to live, in order to survive, but there are things that you're not supposed to eat. In this case, one particular thing, don't eat it. And they
What
didn't.
did we learn that we can eat meat? That we're allowed to eat?
After Noah, after the flood.
What did it say?
It says, now you can eat meat.
Okay. I believe you.
Yeah, pretty clear.
That's-
But the point is that the fact that you can eat anything is a surprise. Why would we do that? Why would God design the world that way? The answer is, that's how he wants it. It's not an accident. It's not like, well, if you're going to create a world and you're going to create people, of course they're going to have to eat. There's no such thing as, of course, they're going to have to eat. He designed it that way.
It was the first kosher food. So, anything. just
Yeah,
not
vegetable.
vegetable.
Yeah, as long as it's not somebody else's vegetable. But the point is that when you eat, you can eat because what am I going to do? I have to eat. I have to survive. I can't let myself die. Or you can eat because this is God's design. It's already less klipa when you have that thought. So when you say the bracha before you eat, what you're saying is, God designed the world in a way in which I can draw him down into this world, making him more present and more prevalent in this world by eating with the right intention. The intention is, this is God's plan. So by doing that, I'm reducing the klipa. So you want to reduce the impurities in your food. You also want to reduce the unholiness in your food. So you filter your water. You also recite a bracha for the same reason, only on a spiritual level. The world is a mix of unholiness and holiness, and the more we can bolster the holiness, the more godly the world becomes. And we can do that in mundane activities, not only when we're doing something holy. So obviously we're sitting around the table talking words of Torah, discussing Torah, understanding God. That's a great mitzvah. We're bringing holiness into the room. What about when we finish studying Torah, we close the books and we go back to a mundane life? What are we doing then? The answer is you can bring godliness into that area of your life also. And maybe there it's even more important. Like, what's a greater accomplishment, to sell ice to the Eskimos or to sell ice to the in the desert? So what's a greater accomplishment, to bring holiness into a Torah study class or to bring holiness into your workplace?
But depends how you look at it, because in the desert there is much more meaning in what you do. Eskimos has ice all around; they don't need you.
That's my point. So when you bring holiness into a synagogue, fine. We just actually in that last week's parsha we had this. Moshe comes to Pharaoh and throws the stick down on the ground, and it becomes, or Aaron throws a stick down on the ground and it becomes a snake. And then Pharaoh says, "I'm not impressed." And then he says, "But we're going to turn all the water into blood," and he turns all the water into blood. And Pharaoh says, "Moses, please, do you know where you are? You're in Egypt. We invented sorcery. We're the masters in the whole world. We're the best at witchcraft and black magic and sorcery. You're trying to impress me with tricks like that? That's like bringing ice to the Eskimos." That's what Pharaoh argues, right? So when you bring holiness into a synagogue, into a holy place, you're going to bring holiness into your Shabbos. You're going to bring holiness into your davening. You're going to bring holiness into your Torah study. All right, that's something. You're going to bring holiness into your workplace. You're going to bring holiness into your mundane everyday life. That's a far greater accomplishment. So in a sense, when he talks about the areas of the world, the areas of creation that are maintained and sustained by godliness through a greater concealment, if you can use that in a godly way, in a way that's even greater than when you can do a mitzvah with something that is kosher. So refraining from eating something that's not kosher, which gives it its purpose, right? It was there to tempt you and you didn't. It now has a certain holiness by your denying it, which might actually be a far greater achievement than eating the kosher food with your bracha on Shabbos.
So now we don't know what's this etzadat, right? They say it can be a pig,
Well,
it can be a dog,
Yeah,
it can
there
be
are different
an apple,
opinions in the.
right? We still all eat all of them. Aren't we repeating the same?
No, he said that one tree, and by the way, that the Gemara says only until Shabbat starts.
Oh, okay.
Once the 6
You
days
should've
of
just
creation, yeah, once the 6 days of creation are over, you could eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were there, you would have done better. By the way, I mentioned before about why he mentions the soul of the non-Jews coming from the Shalosh Klipot HaTmeot. In that sense, if somebody, if a non-Jewish soul who is not from the Chasidei Umot HaOlam, not from the righteous of the Gentiles, which means they're not devoted to God, can turn themselves around and become devoted to God, that's a far greater accomplishment than somebody whose soul is naturally somewhat holy already and then does a mitzvah. So these are all various levels of serving God. To look at it properly, you have to look at it from his perspective, not from. So I'll tell you one more prison story, just because we're talking about it. I brought, you bring in different foods for the different holidays so it's always so one of the first things I brought into the prison when I started working there was it was Purim, so I brought in a box of hamantaschen. So I go into the food services department in the kitchen and I say, here, I have these. And the guy says, what's that? So I said, it's a pastry for the holiday coming up. He says, it was so rude. I couldn't believe this guy. He says, oh, another religious pastry, huh?
It's fun. I mean, that's.
So I was a little offended, but I collected myself and I said, yes, it's a religious pastry. Would you like me to explain the significance? And he looked at me all curious. He says, okay. So I explained that the hamantaschen, it's
The Ilovan.
that's the fun name of it. But what's the meaning of it? The meaning of it is that on the outside it looks like a regular piece of sourdough, a regular piece of dough. But if you can look at it from on top, get the bird's eye view, you see that deep buried inside it, there's real sweetness. If you can see it from God's perspective. He's staring at me like.
That means that Haman was sweet.
It means that the holiday of Purim was sweet. But the point is, he was like in shock, this guy. He says, I've been working here for 22 years. I've never heard anybody explain of the significance of a food before. Now, of course, because you never met a rabbi before. You never met Jewish people before. We have meaning for everything, right? But that's, if you can look at it from the right perspective, you can see holiness everywhere. You just have to find the way in which whatever exists is part of God's plan. And once you discover that it's part of God's plan, everything makes sense.
So then
I have a question.
I was first.
Okay, first I'm going to stop.